today we are going to be doing a 5-pointed star, and this is paper pieced. If any of you have ever done foundation paper piecing, this is a relatively simple thing. However, I always get confused on which way to turn my fabric, and for those of you who do have problems with that, I recommend using solids for the background and for the star. Let's get started. Okay, the first thing you're going to need to do is you're going to need to download and print this out. When you take your measurement, you are going to verify that the pieces A1 through 3 measure 6.5 inches. If it does not, adjust your printer settings to scale it however you can get to it to where this will measure 6.5 inches. And the colors for this, the background of this is calling for a lightish blue, white. The center is a pink, like a hot pink, and these are a little bit lighter pinks. If you want to make your star all the same color, go for it. I'm going to go ahead and follow the recommendation and do 2 different pinks for mine. Okay, so I realized that the way that they've laid out this pattern, you're going to have to print out 2 of these because this D1 and D2 intersect and overlap B3. This is EQ8, not me. I apologize, but you'll have to print this out twice. Okay, I am deviating the pattern. So this pattern is telling you you should first sew A1 to A2. I'm finding it easier to put A3 and have your overlap of A3 and then put A2 on that, and then because this is more of a squarish piece, so I'm just going to sew this right up to this point and I'm going to back stitch. I've had all kinds of problems. Again, you need to print this pattern out twice so you can get all of the pattern pieces because this one is overlapped right here. I apologize for that. That's EQ8. So I'm going to sew right here. Okay, let's see how it did this time. Perfect. Now I'm going to come back, and on the A2 line right here, I'm going to make a 1/4 inch cut seam allowance from that line. Get rid of my excess, and then I know where to line up my next piece. And I've just cut hunks of this color off, not knowing if this is going to be right or wrong. And I have right sides together. This is facing down. The one I'm fixing to stitch is facing up. I'm going to pin on this and make sure when I fold this back, it covers, and it does. Good. Okay. So I'm going to stitch on this line, and I'm going to stitch all the way off the paper. Finger press, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to trim this down to the block size. And that's interesting because that looks like it's not a straight line. Oof. thought that was my imagination, but it is not a straight line. Okay, I'm going to come out 1/4 of an inch from my star point, and I'm going to trim, and hopefully this doesn't cause you a lot of grief for your block. That's just bizarre. Okay, 1/3 of it's down. Now we come to piece B2, and I'm going to do the same method on this. I'm probably going to sew my B1 first. We'll see. It says B2 goes last. Yeah, I'm good with that. I think that this gave bad directions. I think it should have been assigned a different way. And that piece is not big enough. And hopefully I don't run out. This is the last of my fabric. Okay. Let's see what happens. Okay, that's enough for that. Okay, do y'all see what I did? So I first put down this piece, which I can plainly tell is overlapping, and then I'm going to do B1. I've pinned it where it needs to be pinned, or it's acting as the seam allowance, and then when I fold it back, I can tell that all of my raw edges are covered. So I'm going to go ahead and sew the line between B1 and B2. All right. I'm going to press this out. Now I'm finger pressing because I've already pre-starched all of my fabrics. Okay. And now I see I have a bunch of extra. So I'm just going to roughly cut that off. And now I'm ready to do piece B3. And I'm going to fold this back. And I have stitched it, and that will be covered in my next line. And I'm going to go ahead and trim 1/4 of an inch. And are any of these? I'm going to go with that one. I'm not used to foundation paper piecing, so forgive me. Okay. So now I've got this pinned. I'm going to go ahead and sew off the paper on the line between B2 and B3. Okay. Let's see how I done. Yay, I don't see any paper, so hopefully this is all straight. It doesn't look like it is. So I'm gonna line up the center of my star as being straight, and I'm gonna trim this up to the paper seam allowance. All right, B quadrant is ready. Now I'm ready for C. Okay, let me pre-fold my lines. This one's going to be a whole lot easier than the other ones because it's smaller. Okay, I'm going to put a pin in. And I'm going to come to C1 and I'm gonna trim my 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then I'm going to place my fabric. And I am going to then pin right on the seam allowance, or the seam. And then when I fold this out, yay, it's big enough. So I'm gonna go ahead and stitch that down, and I'm gonna sew right off the paper, okay? I can see that my paper covers all of this fabric, so now I'm ready to move on to segment C3. I'm going to trim my seam allowance. And the seam allowance is approximate, doesn't have to be exact. And I'm gonna line up my other pink, and I'm gonna pin it on the seam line, and then I'm gonna flip it and make sure that it covers, and it does. Good. So now I'm ready to stitch, and I will stitch off the paper. Okay, I am ready to trim this one down. Notice that my paper template covers all of my fabric. And this one is a little bit bowed as well. That is bizarre. We may end up having to trim this block down. Okay, one more segment to go. I'm gonna pin I'm going to trim this. Let's see. Please be big enough. Please be big enough. I don't want to have to sew pieces together. Okay, that's... Okay. All right, when I fold this out, we've got a little bit of that not being the right. I think that just is how it folded. Let me move that just a little bit, for whatever reason. Okay, that's barely big enough. Ooh, I thought I was gonna have to redo this whole block. Okay, I am gonna go ahead and stitch off the paper. Okay. Yay! Got it, didn't have to make another one. I'm gonna go ahead and trim this block down to the outer edges. And that seems bowed. This pattern's funky, sorry. I did not vet this before I'm creating it. That's my fault. Now, as far as fabric requirements go, I think that blue piece of fabric I had was 1/2 of a fat 1/4. Okay, now we're gonna lay out our segments. Let's figure that out. I know that A is the top. I know that my center needs to go right like that. And like that. And like that. So I'm going to go in reverse order and sew these. I'm going to go ahead and sew the D pieces to the C pieces first. And this is just a little hint. I'm going to tear away the seam or the 1/4 inch seam allowance on my paper out of the way so I don't have to rip through that, because that's the hardest part. Okay. So, right sides together. Gosh, and it doesn't show you where to match these up either. Okay, I'm seeing this is where we match it up. So that little bitty spigot right there is going to match that spigot right there. And I'm going to pin that. And hopefully I won't have to rip this out. And I'll sew. Where you sew this, you want to make sure that your piece D2 meets up right where your 1/4 inch seam allowance is for both your bottom and top piece. And now I have 3 points of my star. So let's lay these back out. And now I'm going in reverse order. So my first pieces I sew together are D and C. And now I'm going to line up piece B and C and D. So let me get my seam allowances out of my way. This does help drastically and keeps you from ripping on the bias. You already know where your 1/4 inch is. And just get that right out of the way. And I'm going to trim that because it is totally in my way. Okay, now I'm going to line up these pieces. How do I know where to line them up? I'm pretty sure that the seams need to match for your star points. So I'm going to measure it to the middle. And 1/4 inch, that's pretty close. I am going to go with it, and I'm going to sew all the way down. Okay, I did not get that perfectly matched up, but you know what? I don't care. At this point, I don't care. All right, since we're done sewing B and D, I'm going to go ahead and remove my papers. They're in my way. And notice, because I didn't catch that in the seam allowance, how much easier that was to remove. Okay. And now I'm going to remove and pull these back so I don't again sew my papers. And right sides together, I'm going to match up that star point. Approximately there. I'm going to remove my paper back from that seam allowance so I don't sew through it. This is a tip that will help any of you that have done foundation paper piecing and find removing the papers frustrating, because that's the worst part of it. All right. I'm gonna match up my raw edges. That raw edge is gonna catch in my 1/4 inch seam, and so is that one. That one actually looks off. Okay, hopefully I'm sewing this right. Let me sew. Okay, I have a few papers to remove. Let's open it up first. And it's close enough for me. I'm going to use this. Let me finish ripping. Now let's see if this measures 6.5. And I don't think I trimmed down one of the edges. So that edge measures, these 2 edges, I'm going to trim these down. And I'm going to finish removing my papers. Much easier that way. And this star looks very imperfect to me, but it's good enough for the quilt. And I have the look of a blue background and the colors in the quilt. I really like this block. This was fun, but frustrating at the same time. I'm going to be making this again in my other colorway, and be sure to stay tuned on that. Quilt will be shown as I finish the quilt for this, the sew along for this. I will reveal the other quilt as well, changing up a bunch of the theme of the quilt, and you will be amazed. So make sure you stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching.